Windhorse is our innate ability to uplift ourselves and our environment by giving rise to a positive energy that is both relaxed and disciplined. Since 1981, Windhorse Community Services has integrated this understanding with modern conventional therapies, meditation, and contemplative traditions in the development of at-home, whole-person mental health recovery. Windhorse Journal is dedicated to the mission of communicating decades of clinical and personal experience to professionals, educators, students, and anyone seeking recovery options. Please join the dialogue.
Welcome to Windhorse Journal Entry 82, Basic Attendance, Relationships that Invite Health, the Housemate. In this conversation, a group of former Windhorse housemates discuss their experiences on a Windhorse team. They reminisce on countless moments shared in this unique dynamic and reflect on what the role brought to their lives and the relationships built with their roommates while living in a therapeutic household. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to this podcast of the Windhorse Journal, and I'm your host, Chuck Knapp. This conversation is the third in our series on the clinical practice of basic attendance, and today we'll be discussing the role of housemate. I'm so pleased to be joined today by this group of Windhorse clinicians, all of whom have been housemates, and I'll now introduce you all. At Windhorse Community Services for 8 years as both a housemate and team counselor. Charlie currently works in the team counselor role. He also works as a psychotherapist in private practice. He loves to connect with other people and create a safe and non-judgmental space to explore life, meaning, and whatever inspires others. Charlie is a graduate of the Naropa Master's Program in Psychology, a student of Zen Buddhism, and in his spare time loves to hike, converse, and socialize with friends. He also has a collection of 30 or so bonsai trees that he spends time with pruning and shaping. That's interesting. Okay, that's unusual. Do you have any in your background there?
Yeah, I have some right here. Let's see. This one's got a few leaves coming off, but it's doing good.
Wow, beautiful.
Yeah. What kind of a tree is that?
That's a Ficus benjamina.
Okay. Thank you. He finds meaning and fulfillment in bringing his whole self to everything he does, especially his clinical work. Thank you, Charlie. Sylvan Herb Summers, prior high school art teacher, did not know that. Master's in somatic counseling, psychology, and dance movement therapy from Naropa University. You're currently working as a team counselor and community programs facilitator at WCS. You also work with individuals and couples in private practice. So, Sylvan, you were a housemate for several years?
Yes, 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. And also in the community programs facilitator, what is that? What does that involve?
So I lead a variety of different groups. Most of them are social groups. Sometimes there'll be psychoeducation classes, things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So this summer, it's warming up and COVID is kind of mellowing out. We hope to start doing the outings program again that we did last summer.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Julie Barnard is a team leader and admissions assistant at Windhorse Community Services, where she's worked for nearly a decade. She grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and moved to Boulder in 2002 to study Buddhism and yoga at Naropa University. She earned her bachelor's degree in contemplative psychology with a minor in yoga at Naropa in 2004. Buddhism and yoga remain passions of hers, and she's studied both in-depth. Julie became a yoga teacher and a meditation instructor. She is currently completing her master's degree in clinical counseling at Adams State University in Colorado, where she is a member of the CSI Honors Society. Julie loves getting outdoors to hike, garden, camp, or kayak. She also loves cooking for her husband, stepdaughter, and 8-month-old son. Another passion is making music with her family out of her home recording studio. Julie, do you play an instrument, or do you sing, or what do you do?
Primarily sing, but I can play the guitar and piano a little bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Laurie Heinzelman's work background is in human services, education, and communications. She earned a PhD in linguistics from the University of Colorado, Boulder, and hired at Windhorse Community Services as a housemate in 2011. In 2013, she transitioned out of the housemate role and into an administrative position while doing part-time work, doing basic attendance on 2 clinical teams. She's currently Windhorse's Human Resources and Facilities Administrator, as well as a member of the Journal team. In Laurie's spare time, she's often out wandering around in nature with her camera, capturing the incredible beauty of Boulder and beyond. She's also an earnest amateur singer and guitar player. You probably don't have any songs for us this morning, do you?
I don't.
Okay, but if you look on our website, a lot of your photography is on our website.
The nature stuff.
Mike Levy graduated from Antioch College in 2004 with a mixed focus on psychology and society, and was in Buddhist and meditation retreats intensively between 2002 and 2018. Mike was hired at Windhorse Integrative Health later in 2004. Those are our cousin organizations back in Northampton, working on 4 teams as a housemate over 6 years and many other teams as a team counselor and clinical mentor until 2010. Hired at Windhorse Community Services in 2011. He finished his master's in professional counseling in 2012 and was licensed in 2016. Mike was trained and worked as a team counselor, team leader, and later as an intensive psychotherapist at Windhorse Community Services. He's supervised 10 to 15 housemates by now and was a housemate supervisor for some time in that period. He continues to relate to his experience as a housemate as a core experience for all of his work at Windhorse and with others in general, currently bringing that experience to all of his new roles, including the Community Programs Administrator, which I think, Mike, that your insight through your extensive experience really gives you a lot of understanding about how people, when they move through a path with a team and they start to look towards moving out into the community, I think your experience, what you're pointing to, really helps you understand that transition from being in a very supported team environment to transitioning out. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there's this sense of bringing the teamwork to a community setting. I do see community programs as a step out of the team, but not quite fully into one's individual life.
Yeah. So this discussion we're going to have today is going to focus very much on the household and the relationship of the housemate living with the client in the household. At the same time, we all have experience of the complete transition of starting there and moving out into the community programs and just life beyond the team, which Mike, you and Sylvan are both very involved with that level of programming experience too. And Laurie, your office is down in the space where community programs happen, so you're also mixing it up as part of the community with everyone as well. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Before we jump into having some stories about our work, Laurie, would you please read a quick overview of the Windhorse Approach, and then we'll go to our stories.
Sure. So the Windhorse Approach is health-based, meaning that we understand all people to be fundamentally sane and inclined to return to health and balance when the right conditions are present. In this view, confusion or extreme mental states, or some use the term mental illness, are temporary obstacles, more like clouds that may obscure the brilliance of the sun. But just as the sun is never diminished by clouds, likewise, our sanity is not diminished by confusion. So it's always there as our deepest ally. We know that this can really sound like wishful thinking, but it's actually our experience, both personally as well as with our clients and families. At its most basic level,
The Windhorse Approach is characterized by creating individually tailored, home-based, whole-person recovery environments, which invite that person's sanity, health, and balance. Whole person means that we consider and include all aspects of a person's life in the therapeutic process. Our environments are grounded in their physical and domestic world. We cultivate open and healthy relationships. And of course, we work to help our clients clarify and understand their minds and emotions. The primary way that we develop this environment is through relationship. We'll often refer to Windhorse as relational medicine, as we know that when a person is experiencing mental confusion or distress, it's almost always helpful to be in the midst of people with healthy lifestyles and relatively stable minds. We actually experience health to be surprisingly contagious. So we create teams specific to each client's personality and interests in order to jumpstart their connection with ordinary, wholesome life activity. Things such as keeping their home in good order, developing healthy habits of eating, sleeping, and exercise, engaging in their interests, and meeting people outside of the team, which will often involve the greater Windhorse community, school, and work. Another part of the power of our environments is that we bring together teams with a number of complementary roles involved, including the housemate, who's a staff person living in the therapeutic household. The client is also fully included as a team member, likewise families when possible, and together we create a system of relationships that's resilient and which can flexibly adapt as the recovery path evolves. The team and the environment that everyone creates is clearly a more powerful and intelligent therapeutic system than the sum of its parts. This is a very broad stroke description. So to begin bringing this to life, we're going to start with some stories about life in the role of housemate. We'll then go into other questions, all reflecting on the highly variable nature of what a household can look like.
Thank you, Laurie, for that. And Sylvan, you were going to do a little bit of describing of the kind of form of a housemate before we jump into the stories. Would you please take it away?
Sure, yeah. I think, to start, just thinking about the role of housemate, there's a lot of different jobs and meetings and things like that. But I think just overall, it's a non-clinical role, which was interesting for me, having graduated from graduate school with a degree in psychology and starting to do private practice. It was actually refreshing to me to be able to come home and kind of drop that clinical mindset and just be really, really present with my roommate. And I think that's mostly what the role is about, is to just be your roommates with this person, but also different in that you would be a roommate that has a lot more patience and compassion than your average roommate, I think is one of the main distinctions of the housemate role. Yeah, so the role it's a 20-hour-a-week job, so I was also working other jobs outside of that. And you have to be home every night by 10 o'clock. But then at the same time, you're required to take a weekend off every month and leave the household to give yourself some space from the environment. But if you wanted to take 3 or 4 days off, that's a little too much usually. So it's an interesting mix of having to leave your home for a couple days a month, but then also having to be there the rest of the time. And there's usually 2 to 3 scheduled shifts a week that would last from 2 to 3 hours with the person that you're living with. And that could be like making dinner together or scheduled time to do a little house cleaning, chores, things like that. The person I lived with and we always took one of those shift times every week to just get out of the house and go do something fun. Go for a hike or a mountain bike ride, the person I was living with was interested in lots of different hobbies, so we would go and explore a new hobby here and there. And that kind of connects with this idea of kind of bringing along, so helping people that may have some social anxiety get out into the community and with some support. And then we have a house meeting every week with the team leader, and then also it's the team leader and both I and the person I was living with, so the three of us every week we would get together and talk. And so if there's any challenges with the living relationship or the environment, we would talk about that in that meeting. And then we had team meetings, so everyone in the team got together, and every other week the person I was living with would be part of that meeting as well. And again, just a broader how's it going. And then we had I had individual supervision with the team leader once a week as well, to talk about any challenges of the work. And then we had monthly housemate group supervision, where all the housemates got together with the clinician to get support for the role. And during COVID, that kind of increased to twice a week, because we were all in the home quite a bit more, especially when we were quarantined. And I think the housemates really appreciated that, and that's continued now, that it's bi-monthly housemate group supervision. And then we also, while I was in that role, me and another housemate got together and we created this kind of informal housemate gathering where we all just get together and go out and have a good time together, which was supportive as well, and created a sense of community around the work. Yeah, I think am I missing anything? Is that everything?
I think just to clarify that it's a housemate moves into a client's house. It's not a neutral, it's not a Windhorse owned household. It's moving into the existing or set up household of a client, and making that as much your home temporarily as you can.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to start us off with a little vignette from your time?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. And just to offer a broad brushstroke to remind you, I went through this kind of getting to know a client, getting to know myself in the household several times over. So by working on 4 different households for different durations, I got to know myself more in relationship each time. So I was coming from a place of long-term retreat and traveling in some ways, waiting to land. And Windhorse, to me, at the time, sounded a little bit like an escape, like a way I could join society in some way, but continue my retreat, continue my contemplative pursuits, and sort of be landed in a team, free room and board. So there was a selfish way in, actually, as a housemate, a kind of wandering mendicant housemate. And as soon as you land, you realize it's a much more immersive experience than the escape you have in mind. So, I did get a chance generally to rouse to my highest self when possible. I had such motivation to bring contemplative arts, my own painting, flower arranging, continue my meditation practice, but also just be curious about the community. I think in a way, because I was motivated to help others. I was in a relationship in the household, and so I was constantly maybe overcoming my own obstacles that I might have living alone. So I'm thinking of, I spent some money every other week on flowers, and I would set them up in the household. I will say there was times where I didn't see my roommate, the client living at this household for long periods of time, and so I would relate to the flowers and the kitchen during my set shift times or when I was supposed to be in relationship together. There was a lot of room for this person to take whatever space he needed, and yet I could still attend to our relationship by working in the household. I'm just remembering we put together these flower arrangements, and I had this idea that they would be beautiful in this particular way, and the flower would be on the top, and then there'd be this moss on the bottom. And often he would come through the space, and he liked to take apart electronics and either make them better or just learn how they work. And there was often just a lot of pieces of electronics around that I was either cleaning or putting into their place. And he would add a motherboard to the flower arrangement, or some wires that came out the side. And actually, it was brilliant. It was beautiful. I never could have thought of that in the way that I brought to the flowers. And yet, even when he wasn't talking to me and taking his own space, he would relate to what I was offering to the space, and I just really appreciated that. And when we did come back around one way or another over a meal or a late night conversation, and a cycle had passed, we had something to laugh about. So I was just remembering these supposed contemplative activities that get interrupted by relationship.
So how was that, Mike, to have him come at your art from a totally different angle? I mean, how did that affect you?
Yeah, it was really great. I mean, always like when there's some goal, when you're in this role, you want relationship. You want some kind of engagement. I just had an idea that engagement would be based on my ideas, what I thought a flower arrangement was. So when he would offer this strange or alternative approach to what we were doing, I got to work with my mind, to think of that's not correct, and then let in, well, that's who you are, and that's who we are now. So it just was a great expression of something I couldn't have done alone, either of us, really.
One thing to just say here that really struck me about this story was the unexpected ways in which we can begin to have a relationship with someone. It can be a little bit difficult or maybe awkward to connect with someone, especially when we have this sort of expectation that we're getting together to have a relationship. And it sounded like, Mike, from your story, that your roommate would take significant space at times, and that was an okay and good part or healthy part of the relationship. And yet, he interacted with something that you were passionate about and added and included himself in that process, which, a motherboard with some wires just sounds like another flower when I'm hearing it from here, and just seeing actually how in sometimes subtle and I think actually quite powerful ways that the relationship forms in unexpected and kind of curious places, and just appreciating how I also would experience things like that in my role as a housemate.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. It really, for me, highlighted maybe what you said, Sylvan, that the obligation or expectation for us to be around in the household for long periods of time allowed for a lot of space. And a lot of these spontaneous opportunities couldn't have happened without that much time, just sharing space.
As you talked, Mike, too, I remember like even any of us stepping into this role, it's like the idea we were hired for our sanity and stability, and I think I speak for myself. I had certain ideas about what I would bring and what it would look like, and for you it was your flower arranging and whatever, and the real sanity is in allowing the client to just be who they are and disrupt what we think is what we're bringing. Here it is. It's like, well, no, the client is a person too, and their notion of what you're trying to create is equal and important. So there's a little humbling that goes on in thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to bring my sanity here. Isn't that nice? And it's like, well, no, that's not exactly how it looks. It's an interactive process, and it's negotiated all the time.
I think that's a good point, Laurie, that you're also bringing your neurosis to the relationship too. And so, as patient as we might be, there are things that are going to come up, and there's going to be conflict in the relationship. And I think that was a big piece of learning for both me and the person I was living with, for me was to be able to, in Windhorse we talk a lot about mutual recovery. And for me, it was to be able to state my needs and have clear boundaries. And I had a lot of opportunity to experiment with that. And for my roommate, it was kind of like for him to be able to hear those, and then also know that we could have some friction, and things could be like we could not both be seeing eye to eye, but then we could talk about those issues that would come up, and we could work through them. And like it wouldn't mean like that was the end of the relationship. We could work through things, and I think that was a big learning for my roommate, and for me it was how to have clear boundaries for myself. And So it was a great kind of mutual recovery in that.
I was thinking about the mutual recovery too, Sylvan, and the tension between just being your ordinary self in the household and, like you were speaking to, Laurie, it's your job. You have you have this job. You're bringing your sanity and your health, but you're not doing something in the way that you would think you're doing. It's more just being there, which actually turns out it's a lot more challenging to just be there and be your ordinary self, living your life, growing along with the client in mutual recovery. It's very subtle and nuanced, and it was harder for me than I thought it was going to be to just be there. It's easier to kind of hide out in the doing of something.
Funny, you all going towards mutual recovery. And one of the things we discovered a long time ago with this approach is that particular element provides so much potential for connection because we're not going in like, I'm well, you're sick, and we're going to fix you.
Mhm.
It's more being with as opposed to doing to,
Mhm.
especially in this role. And R.D. Lang had a term co-presence that was something that comes to mind a lot about when I think about a housemate's presence in a home. Is like you're showing up, learning to be in the environment yourself, and you're learning to accept somebody else at the same time. And that is part of that, the contagiousness of sanity. Thanks, Mike. Let's roll to Charlie. Would you please share something about your time as a housemate with us?
Sure. So, similarly to Mike, when I became a housemate, I was coming from just having finished a summer actually as a camp counselor and really engaging with my own spiritual practice and looking for a place to deepen that. And coming to a Windhorse housemate position seemed similarly ideal for me to be focused on my own kind of path and personal development while also kind of experiencing the stimulation and engagement of the relational aspect of being a housemate. And that ended up being impressively moving at times, especially with my housemate, who was coming from a very vulnerable position in life, had just really been dealing with quite a lot and was, really in a sensitive and vulnerable place. And moving in together is this sort of awkward process, kind of knowing that you're having some sort of a somewhat unique relationship. So there's a little bit maybe of some sort of extra, you could experience it as pressure going into that. But what I found was that the team really helped support the client and myself in establishing and experiencing the warmth of that relationship. And what really comes to mind was in the first week or so of living with the person I was living with, the team supervisor, Anne Marie, came and had dinner with us at the house. And I just remember how personal it felt, how really familial it felt. The client and Anne Marie were both Italian and both had a connection to food. And Anne Marie came over and we all cooked together, talked together. We, all got involved in the process of cooking and then talked about, cooking and what it meant to us and had this beautiful, intimate dinner together in the first just week or so of moving in. And I just remember how clearly it seemed to affect my roommate that team made themselves equal and just warmly involved. And for me, it was a grounding and involving experience where I got to experience just feeling the safety, the relationship, and the warmth of the relationship. And I think that was the beginning of, really starting to feel like, okay, we're doing this. We're living together, and we are both, me and the person I was living with, sort of just walking through our lives mutually, and yet not with a big agenda. Instead, just more of a, hey, we're living together and maybe we're forming a relationship here, and let's just see how that turns out.
Charlie, the way you talked about the team supervisor coming and joining you for dinner, I'm not sure that, I mean, that definitely happened for me over the years, high holidays especially, and not just the team leader, but the family, and how a family came and visited the household that I lived with their child in this case. They did a special trip and they kind of brought a whole Thanksgiving setup, and there was a way in which I really felt included in their family, and that was a strong intention. It's not always the case, that way in which family really does develop. And so there's the client, the housemate's family that's involved, but then there's the team, and how much I just so appreciated the relationship I had with the team leader. I think not so much at the time, but in retrospect, he was a lifeline for me and provided all sorts of opportunities as a mentor and as an activity point person. And so there were lots of examples that my housemate and I were basically just coordinating about getting ready to go do something with this team leader. In retrospect, we both had this father figure that we were relating to in different ways, that developed out of the roles in the team.
I'll just piggyback a little bit on the family piece. I mean, the person I lived with for 3 years, I really feel like they're part of my family now. So it's nice to get I was definitely have a soft spot in my heart and get a little emotional just thinking about what a great relationship developed out of our time together.
Yeah, just to add to that is years after being a housemate with this person, I went and visited them. They had made big progresses in their life, were living individually, had a house and a girlfriend and a baby. And it was just a very joyful and emotionally connected reunion to go over, have dinner together, and just feel the mutuality that we had cultivated years back kind of be this nice touchstone to re-engage with.
In my experience of long-term relationships like that, where people come out of a place where they're maybe having a really challenging place in life and they come through like that, there's a kind of a love that happens in that space that is a remarkable thing to experience over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie. And Laurie, you have something to weigh in with too, please.
I do. And my story involves Julie as well. So we were in the unusual for Windhorse these days situation of two housemates living with a single client. And I am going to use the word client just to be clear, because there were three of us living in a household. So this client was struggling with what Chuck, the team supervisor, told me as a strong and persistent psychosis. That was the invitation to step into this team, is that this is what this young woman was struggling with. It was pretty daunting. And the idea is that really she needed two housemates to keep her grounded and actually safe. There were some significant threats to her safety given her extreme states of mind. So I moved into the house first, and then Julie moved in a few weeks later. And this young woman, I'm going to call her Carly. It's not her name. But what she was experiencing was she heard voices pretty consistently, and she really thought she was on a reality show and was being filmed consistently. I mean, I don't know if you can imagine what that must have been like for her, but moving into that situation was pretty intense and just unusual. I hadn't experienced anything like that before, but so she was, contending with these voices constantly, and to try to build a relationship with her was tricky because she had this other life that was so dominating her. And as Julie moved in, with three people living in the household, we had to negotiate relationships with each other. It wasn't just client housemate, it was housemate client, in a way that was, for the health of all of us. But one of the things we noticed with Carly is that on trash day, she would take things out to the dumpster by the curb that seemed to be perfectly fine, valuable household items. And we were kind of like, well, what is this? And it took us a while to realize that actually the voices that Carly was hearing, they were telling her to get rid of these things. There was a skateboard, there was silverware, there was a set of curtains and clothing. And, Julie and I were like, well, these are perfectly good items. And if she doesn't want them, they could go to a thrift shop or somebody could use them. And it took us a while to understand that she was experiencing these command hallucinations, telling her to buy these things, put financial hardship on her family, but then to throw them away because she didn't deserve them. These voices and this, experience she was having in her mind was pretty cruel and dominating. But the tricky part for Julie and me in this is that our own value systems, where it's like, you don't throw away good things, somebody has to use them. So we wanted to respect our client in her autonomy and her decisions, but this seemed crazy to us. So what we did a few times is, on trash day, one of us would stand guard in the household and one would go to the curb and go through the dumpster and pull out any household belongings that Carly had thrown away that were perfectly good, with the idea that we would then hide them somewhere in the house and take them to a thrift shop. Well, she did catch us at times and was like, no, you can't do this. You can't do this. And it took a while to understand that this was a grave thing to her, that if she didn't obey the voices that told her to get rid of her things, and we somehow interrupted that, there was potential harm there. So we had to negotiate that. Like, there were all these other forces in our client's life that had power over her, and how, our sanity of, no, if you don't want something, you give it to somebody who can use it, was just totally outside of her experience. It just illustrated that all the adaptations you have to make to, a mind that's very different than yours.
So you were living in the house at times with more than one person. It sounds like there was other presences.
Yes. Yeah, and Julie and I knew that these voices were all products and projections of her mind, but she experienced them as other people. And so we had to negotiate with her and all of these other presences in her head and try to come to some kind of sanity.
I really appreciate the story, Laurie, and your articulation of how we as housemates need to approach our basic views of normal and reassess everything. It's just reminding me of the ways in which everything, like what dirty dishes mean and you do with them, and bedtime, and the joining process. I think that was such a big part for me in my relationship with housemates that I lived with, was joining what they were already doing as normal, and slowly letting go of my own version. And maybe we meet somewhere in between. I think we talk in Windhorse about exchange, and we would have to literally exchange views or our experience of normal. And maybe, if they were up all night and I was up during the day, we might just have a late night shift and sort of meet in the middle there. But it just felt like unique and flexible in the Windhorse experience to meet a client who has come through one of our housemates, as well as ourselves, with a normal with a question mark, so that we can actually be in relationship where we're at.
And if you question normal, how, is there a slippery slope to you as a housemate sliding into a kind of extreme state that's not healthy? It's like, where's that balance?
Yeah, I really rely on my team for that. There's definitely been examples where I, in joining with my client, established a new normal that wasn't particularly safe or healthful. And it took the team to constantly edit and create system and relationships to redirect that and make some clinical decisions that weren't up to me.
I think one thing that is always true for me in being a housemate and the various times I've done it is how often it's an opportunity for the housemate, for myself, to learn and grow in general. That there are always, circumstances and situations that provoke in me what my conditioned reactions could be, and to get an opportunity to really see that, to have these moments where and this is again the mutual recovery is, oh, something here stands out, like a lot of dirty dishes, or we're piling up these sculptures was in one of my situations, and to see my desire for what I want or what I consider to be, standard or normal or something like that, and to have the opportunity to gain insight into my own mind, my own way of looking at things, and how doing so, if I'm successful, actually allows for a new relationship with the client or with the person I'm living with, and or myself, and in all kinds of different ways. So just that.
So I think part of what y'all are describing is an attunement, questioning a rigidity we can have about how one should live. At the same time, Laurie, what you're describing, this person was spending a lot of time in states of mind that were pretty disconnected from consensus reality. And so part of the role and part of the whole team's object is to be inviting a person from possibly that kind of absorption and disconnection into relationship and back into being more in sync with a way of functioning where they're in kind of a happier, healthier place. I realize those terms are really slippery themselves, but how did you experience the effect that you and Julie had on her as far as inviting her into more relationship and connection and ordinary flow of life?
For me, it was a lot of kind of sticking with it and just continuing to show up. And I appreciate, Laura, you mentioning like relating with someone who has a mind that's very different from yours. I had to keep remembering that, because there would be these moments where, a lot of the time she was absorbed, relating to the voices and not present, but then you never knew when that was going to shift. And I would experience that often if I did something for her, like make a meal, which was a normal part of our routine. I would be cooking something for myself or for anyone and sharing it or offering it. And she might say nothing to me directly the whole time until she finished, and she would say, "Thank you, Julie." And so there would be these moments where just continuing to do the ordinary things and being consistent and as stable as possible and sticking with it, and then that would happen. And it would surprise me because it would be out of the ordinary to be addressed directly, her using my name and really seeing me and then me feeling that. But it would happen, and it could happen at any time. So I started to feel like I just wanted to be as ready for that as possible and as open to that as I could, so that I could really receive her when it did happen and we made a connection.
How long did you live with her?
I was there for 7 months.
7 months. Laurie,
It was 18.
18?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was at the point Julie left, then another person came in for 6 months, and then about 4 months of just being there with Carly by myself.
My experience as the team supervisor was that from the time she joined us, we formed a team, till the end of it, there was a definite relaxation and more connection with people. And I think she also, even though it may not have been communicated a lot, I think there was something about her that felt how much you both, I guess, caring about her. There was something about the way you each showed up in your own way, caring for her, which I think helped her survive, literally survive, because it was pretty touch and go there for a while.
Yeah.
I think she really felt that.
I guess what I wanted to mention for the record is this team that I also was a part of as a team counselor. Again, the role of time, that it's not the same with every client and every relationship, but the ability for the team to change how many people lived in the household and what became shift activities, and getting an opportunity to experience the cycles of non-present voices for long periods of time and then present responses. It just took a lot of activity to start to gather relationship because there was such a narrow window of present-centered interpersonal relationship going on. So it was a great team to uh, utilize, the awareness of the team over time, see that relationship developing.
Yeah, and she went through that arc of time with us, which must have been about 18 months, sounds like, Laurie, because you were there the whole time. And she was able to transition into a much lighter form of support. So, Julie, you have something more. You have another story.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Lori and I lived together with our shared client, Carly. And I not sure how far into the relationship this started to happen. It wasn't right away. So it definitely took a little time of having some rapport with her before I noticed this. But sometimes for my scheduled shift times, particularly in the evening, this would happen. She didn't necessarily want to hang out with me or talk to me or relate to me directly. She would be absorbed in her own world, coming in and out of her room, sort of doing her own thing. And at a certain point, I thought, well, what if I just plant myself somewhere and I just stay there and let her come and go as she pleases? And so I started hanging out in the living room and I would play my guitar. And somewhere along the way, that was interesting. And it became one of the only things that would sort of draw her toward me, but she would still not really talk to me. She would pace and walk around, but slowly come closer and closer and closer, especially if I just sort of sat in my own space, if that makes sense. Like if it was too intimate, it seemed like that could be kind of threatening, and then she would want to go right back to her room. But if I just sat there and I just played the guitar, it was like this gentle invitation. And she would slowly come closer to me and come closer to me and spend a little more time in the same room as me. And even though we wouldn't necessarily talk, to me, that would feel so intimate because I knew it wasn't easy for her. It wasn't like the first thing she would think she wanted to do is come be in the space with me when she had a voice telling her to do something else. But then she would come through and hang out, and then it would feel more simple and ordinary. Yeah, something about music, and again, back to just being ordinary and being yourself and doing your own thing. And it was this invitation that I started to rely on, and I started to use that a lot.
Julie, thank you for reminding me of how much I gained from this role, and that those subtle differences of working out, letting go of expectations, and sort of the same thing that you can be doing, if you're intending to draw her out, has a different result than if you just relax into your own space and do what you're doing. I remember this around the dishes in the sink, not in this team so much as my housemate at the time, where we would make an agreement at the team, the house meeting, and and then it wouldn't kind of follow through day to day, and so I would find myself back at the sink washing the same dish that wasn't mine, and and realizing over time that I could wash that dish out of contempt and like this is not appropriate, or wash that dish out of guilt and like feel like, oh, this is my job, I guess somebody's got to do it, and or I could just wash, I could be in the water of the sink and like let go of that. And I'm doing the same thing, but I learned so much from those moments as a housemate because there's sort of nothing to do except the dish is to learn how I'm doing it and what his presence really means. So I just really appreciate the opportunity as a housemate to have no further clinical obligation because the team is there, but to really be present in the environment. Your guitar playing story reminded me of that.
What comes to mind for me is something that we've recognized this all along in the housemate role. And we didn't have words for it when we first started doing this, the neurobiology folks have been onto this now for some time, which is the co-presence of people tends to begin regulating each other. And if you have people in relatively stable places that can work with more of the extremes of their mind, like in that case, Laurie, you and Julie, that starts to slowly have an effect on regulating the system of the person you're living with as well. And I think music obviously is one of those kinds of things that the right kind of music can really draw somebody and really start setting a rhythm, so to speak. And that's just a great example of this regulation of your effect on her, actually, and you all metabolizing sometimes her extremes of hitting you as well. That's a no small thing in this role of how do you take care of yourself in it. But also in your taking care of it, you're having a very strong, both conscious and unconscious presence.
That just makes me think of, part of the role of the housemate is to just really appreciate somebody for who they are, especially because, in our society, you could be a very wealthy white male and still be a minority, if you're working with a intense mental health challenge, or if you're working with neurodiversity, society still is, there's a lot of prejudice around, for people that have mental health challenges or who are neurodiverse. And so part of, I think, the role is just to appreciate people for who they are, especially if they feel like they don't fit into society or society is telling them they're wrong, to be able to counteract that and appreciate all the positive aspects about them, because there's always many. And I was just thinking about the dishes piece that Mike brought up. It used to drive me nuts that my roommate would leave food out and it would just go bad. And it's like, can't you just put the food away? But yeah, I'm privileged, coming from a place of neurological privilege. Like, my mind works in such a way that it's easy for me to remember to put the food away. But my roommate's mind, it's very difficult, for him to remember to do these kind of sequential steps and things. So yeah, I think we still have a long way to go. Even people who are therapists like us, a lot of people in this talk about, just certain words we use. Like I just said, that's nuts. So it would drive me nuts. And there's some kind of sense of that comes from crazy, from people who aren't, quote, mentally stable or whatever. And I think in some ways people who are deemed mentally stable or neurotypical kind of makes us feel better to be able to be like, oh, well, I'm not crazy. I'm not nuts. I'm not, and if we talk about people as saying well, I'm providing a sane environment for the person, or I'm sane, then we're saying that the other person is insane. Right. And I think there's a very fine line there around, there's something about help making neurotypical people feel like they're okay, with their own neurosis. Like, we don't have our own neurosis almost, So I think we have a long way to go with languaging and just really appreciating everyone for who they are, regardless of, the challenges they may be working with in their own minds and their own psychology. But I think that was a big part of the role of the housemate, because my roommate especially, I think, all growing up through school, and I think in his family environment as well, people were very frustrated with him because he couldn't do things the way everybody else did them, and everybody felt like, well, mine works this way. Like, what's your problem? Like, you should be able to do this, this, and this. And his mind just worked differently, So being able to provide a space where it's okay for his mind to work differently, and we'll figure out another way to get the food in the refrigerator. And, sometimes some food will go bad, and that's just how it is, Not something he could really help necessarily, Just being able to really appreciate him for who he was. He's an incredibly brilliant person. And I think his strengths were not pointed out to him in school, and maybe not so much in his family environment either. And so being able to highlight some of those things, I think, was was really helpful to combat some of that societal stigma.
Thanks for bringing the stigma part here. The othering that goes on in the extreme state world is so fierce and severe as far as how it affects a person's sense of being and health and fitting in, and do I deserve to be here, and there's all kinds of things reinforcing self-aggression. And Sylvan, when you first started talking, I was reminded of one of the principles of Windhorse, which is that no matter how confused the mind has become, recovery is possible. And whenever I say that or write it, it's pretty easy to take that means, like if a person's in an extreme state, that can be a deadly place to be. And it's our experience that people can come out of that. I've also done teams long enough to know that teams get into extreme places and like really confused. I get into really confused. Families do. So we all get into our places, and how do we invite each other to come back to just a place where we're more gentle with ourselves, in relationship with each other, and making our lives work. It's really easy to other like that and not remember that we have to work with our own minds.
It's just interesting that how much prejudice there is against people who have mental health challenges, and yet the CDC says over 50% of people in the United States at some point in their lifetime will experience what could be diagnosed as a mental health challenge.
Yep. And that's not going down.
I guess I just want to mention, what's rolling around in the back of my mind is how much deep appreciation I have had for being in this role in relationship with people who I've come to realize are often, regardless of the symptomology that arises out of it, just very highly sensitive people.
Mm.
Often in touch with a higher state of being, a higher sensitivity level than I tend to access. But being in relationship with them reminds me of it in myself. I recognize it as a great suffering because it hasn't been fully integrated, and that's what the team's helping to do. But in the meantime, keeping that sensitivity, utilizing it, putting it back into a place that can serve. I've just had so much appreciation to be with roommates and my own exchange with a higher sensitivity than efficiency. Just honoring the way in which Windhorse allows, again, for the space of the housemate relationship, to swim in that level of exchange and then not be responsible for cutting it off until it becomes bad food.
Thank you all for sharing these stories. Those really conveyed how much variation there is in teams, in how teams and households work, and with the folks that come here to be with us as clients.
I just want to mention again for those listening who haven't been hired to live with someone, just these ways in which think about it, but it's an office, it's a place of living, it's an activities center, and so just being a housemate means a huge letting go of privacy and or control over your situation. And just you come downstairs in your bathrobe because you forgot it's a team meeting and they're in your living room. You're in it together in a pretty vulnerable way. It actually takes way more energy to control the situation than to let go into it. And I think that's pretty contagious too for the clients we live in. So just want to congratulate the heroism of our housemates over the years.
Mike, what you're saying there reminds me, Laurie, of what you were bringing up about what drew, what drew you to this role. And it's a really interesting question, I think, given how you're really letting go of an awful lot of control of your living circumstances.
Well, I think to be a housemate, you have to have this rare combination of being internally stable, but in your own living circumstances and relationship circumstances kind of unmoored. Because you have to be able to move into a client's house for a 6-month period or so. It's unusual that people are in those circumstances. Yeah, and and as Mike said, you have to be willing. You're part of a whole team, and you you are the one or two people who live with a client. But there's a whole team, and those team members come in on scheduled shifts, and you have to, allow the flow of that. And actually, I worried about that when I first became a housemate, because I thought there's going to be a lot of coming and going, and I need a certain amount of private time. And I found that I really enjoyed various team members coming in. Of course, it was scheduled time, so you knew when you had downtime and time with others, but coming together around meals and things like that, I just really appreciated that, and new people to talk to and engage with, and I loved it. I mean, when I finished, it was nice to move into my own place again. But yeah, it was pretty amazing.
I like that you mentioned that, the flow of people coming in and out of the house, Laurie, because one of my, I think, trepidation I had moving into the house is that the environment was very stark,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kept that way on purpose for safety reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize until that point, I didn't realize how attached I was to having art on the walls, or having plants around, or tchotchkes, I don't know, any just things in the space. And we didn't have that at all. But what we did have were the people. And that was the life that was in the house constantly, people coming and going. And like Laurie said, you knew because you had the schedule, but the physical environment was seemingly barren and stark, except for the people coming in and out. And that made all the difference for me.
I would also just like to comment on the willingness and the bravery of clients to let someone that you just barely know, come live with you and support you, and have all these different people coming into your life, and stretching yourself in a way to not hide out so much. Oftentimes that's a pattern that many people have, and so to let yourself be vulnerable and kind of exposed and available to this unique healing process.
Thank you. I was thinking about that. The courage it takes for a client to allow all these people into their home and their life. Could any of us do that? I don't know that I could.
That's a really great point. Yes. One thing to note here, the housemate role, one of the first confusions that people will have when they hear about it, like say if the client is inquiring about coming here or the family, is that, so they're living with a psychotherapist? No. Maybe that housemate does psychotherapy someplace else, but what we found was if a housemate gets too therapeutically ambitious, it really drives everybody out of the house. It's just not a good situation. So you have to have this combination of recognizing what will be useful and helpful for you and the other person, and as well as part of the team, but to not engage like, we're going to do psychotherapy now and all that kind of stuff. So just wanted to make sure that was part of this conversation.
Would definitely say that that's a learning curve, for the team to articulate and to be in relationship with a housemate about, because it comes up, everything comes up. So redirecting becomes a skill that you bring to the game. I do remember, finding that some of our only relatable time was out on the porch at 10 p.m. over a cigarette and talking about their illness, because that's what was up. And then they would sleep through their therapy appointment the next day. And it took me some time to realize my role.
Yeah, and the continuum of relationships on a team, there's this therapist-friend combination we talk about, where at the more kind of professional end of the therapist-friend relationships, you have the team supervisor and the psychotherapist. And at the other end of the continuum, as housemates, the relationship is so much more eye to eye in a certain kind of living in the same household sense. And there's a whole lot of friendship involved in the situation, which you all, I think, have described really beautifully. Thank you all so much. This has been a real treat to be here with you all and get these different lenses into the households of a Windhorse team. I feel really fortunate to have been able to sit in here with you during this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Windhorse Journal Entry 82. Stay tuned for the next post of this series, diving into basic attendance and the roles on a Windhorse team. Our next conversation will be with a group of team counselors who will discuss their experiences and highlight how basic attendance weaved its way throughout.
Windhorse Journal is a publication of Windhorse Community Services, supporting recovery from mental health challenges at home and in the community since 1981.